One day at home in her apartment, 45-year-old Clayton County resident Nikki Price noticed water leaking from her ceiling. So she called management, but got no response. A day went by. The leak from a broken hot water heater continued.
I started having to take pictures off the wall because that's just how bad the leak was. I had to move furniture, out of the way.
One day became 5. Management wasn't responding, and so on Friday, Nikki called the complex's code enforcement office.
When I called code enforcement is like, well, we can't come out. There's nothing that we could do.
Nothing they could do because Nikki Price was behind on her rent. Earlier that month, the apartment complex had filed an eviction notice against her. And now they said until they had what she owed, they weren't obligated to do anything about the leak. But here's the thing. Nikki Price should have been good to go. See, she had taken action on her eviction notice. She had filed the necessary paperwork with the courts to get rental assistance as part of the federal COVID relief program to pay off the rent that she owed. And the courts, they had approved her for that payment. And yet, here she was. Every few weeks, she found new eviction notices on her door, and now her ceiling was sagging with water. The code enforcement office told her that she could call the local fire department, which she did. The fire department arrived and fixed the problem after 3 days. That was July. 2 months later, her apartment still shows damage from the leak. The carpet doesn't smell good. And Nikki Price, who's been approved for federal assistance to pay off her back rent, is still living in limbo, unsure if she's about to be evicted at any moment. And she's not alone.
My immediate concern, first and foremost, is that we are about to see the amount of homelessness increase drastically. We're ending up with a lot of people in a lot of very desperate situations with nowhere really to go.
This is What's Next ATL, the podcast powered by the Atlanta Regional Commission, where we explore the big ideas shaping Metro Atlanta. I'm Kate Sweeney. And if Nikki Price's situation sounds super dicey, and it is, we'll get into her story today, housing advocates like Erica Taylor are saying that we could very soon see a lot more cases like hers. Now that a national moratorium on evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic has been overturned, advocates are forecasting a wave of people losing their homes and warning of ripple effects for all of us for years to come. Today, we dive into exactly what that looks like here in Metro Atlanta, where before the COVID pandemic, 1 out of 3 households reported spending more than 30% of their income on housing, a condition known as being cost-burdened because it can leave little else for other essentials like food, medicine, and transportation. The pandemic has made conditions more dire. About 1 in 5 renters in the region, or 21%, are behind on their rent. That's higher than the 15% national figure, according to a recent Census Household Pulse survey. Today, we have a story from someone who's trying to navigate an already overwhelmed system in order to stay under her roof. We'll see why stories like this are so common and learn about some of what needs to happen to keep it from getting a lot worse. Stay tuned. What stands between Nikki Price and eviction is a single signature. Let's back this up. See, when your landlord files an eviction against you, you have 7 days to file what's called an answer with the court, putting in some kind of defense to the eviction so that you get a court hearing, which, with the backup these days, can take months to be scheduled. Nikki Price did this. You can also file for that federal rental assistance we discussed as soon as you fall behind on your rent. This requires a great deal of paperwork. Nikki Price did this too, although it took some doing. The nonprofit line she was told to call was overwhelmed, and she kept reaching a full voicemail box. But then Nikki found a phone number for a person at the magistrate court. A real live person happened to pick up, and she was able to walk Nikki through the form she had to fill out to file for relief that would pay off her back rent and offer her some breathing room to figure out what's next. The woman in the magistrate's office told Nikki she was all set. except for one signature from her apartment complex's manager.
She was like, go down there, poke your head in the door, tell her that I'm sending her an email that she needs to respond to. And so that way we can go ahead and get you paid up. And I went down there, I called, I did everything. I sent her emails and, letting her know.
But even trying, day after day, Nikki couldn't track down the manager. Then the apartment complex was sold to new management. Meanwhile, Nikki's not the only one who still needs that former manager to sign off on rent relief money that will pay off her back rent. Many of her neighbors are looking for that signature too. And some have been evicted.
I saw my neighbor, the people were just, bringing out, stuff in her apartment and just putting it on the lawn, and I'm like, it was extremely sad to see. She's getting off of work at, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you come home and you get locked out of your house. That's humiliating.
Her neighbor was single, living by herself, just like Nikki. And Nikki's afraid now that what happened to her neighbor will happen to her too.
My true fear is that, they're not going to, get the back payment because there's so much miscommunication, and that they try to file another eviction on me. That's like extremely scary.
Stories like Nikki Price's are really common, says Erica Taylor. She runs the Evictions Defense Program at the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, or AVLF.
And one of the big problems that I am seeing is that they're able to get rent assistance, but they aren't able to get the cooperation of the landlord. And so they aren't able to complete the process to see landlords just turn down this money because of the extra steps that it would take. And because it's not quite all of it, that's honestly very disheartening to see.
She says it's disheartening and right now kind of scary as evictions are ramping up after the moratorium was ended on August 26th.
We do have an eviction counter and tracker that we've been looking at. And what we discovered was that within the first week of the moratorium being declared unconstitutional, we saw 500 new cases being filed. It's a large increase.
Taylor says that even before the pandemic, her organization saw what she calls an eviction crisis coming in Metro Atlanta.
We've had a crisis that's been building, especially in Atlanta proper, where affordable housing has become less and less. We keep seeing more luxury housing being built, and the low-income housing, affordable housing is not keeping pace.
According to data from National Equity Atlas from the week of June 23rd through July 5th, 2021, 106,000 Metro Atlanta households were behind on their rent. 82% of those were people of color, and 90% were low income.
And rents keep increasing, which is basically forcing the average renter into a situation where they are rent burdened or forced into substandard homes.
Even before the water leak in July, Nikki Price says things weren't right at her apartment complex, where she moved 2.5 years ago. Early on, her mailbox stopped locking, and she's had mail stolen. The complex's entry gate has never worked, and people come and dump trash and old furniture into and around the complex's dumpsters. Cockroach infestations have been frequent. But she is unsure of where else she could go. Since a car accident in 2006 left her disabled, she gets federal disability benefits, and she's limited in the amount of income she can make if she wants to keep those benefits. Meanwhile, she is physically limited in what she can do, all of which makes it tough to find a job, which is how she ended up spending down her entire savings on rent. Nikki is an example of someone who was already at risk of being part of that eviction crisis that AVLF and others saw coming even before the COVID pandemic. But with good-paying, accessible jobs scarcer now than ever, Nikki and many Metro Atlantans are in an extremely tough spot. What is it like? I mean, you say it feels like you're in limbo. So how do you plan for the future?
All out the window.
Hmm.
Yeah. I was actually offered a job, and I'm like, I don't know what to put on this application as far as my address is concerned. You can't put your address on a resume if you're not even sure if you're going to have to leave that interview and go sleep in your car, and then you can't get through an interview. They ask you, well, we need you to be here such and such a day. And you tell them that, oh, well, I can't make it because I'm in the middle of an eviction. You can't do that on a job interview. It's like, even if you do get the job, if you're concerned about where the heck you're going to live, you're not going to perform on that job.
This is part of what AVLF's Erica Taylor calls evictions ripple effect.
The actual act of eviction, where the marshal is there and watches as these people's property is removed from the home and dwelling and put out on the street, can be very traumatizing for our families. But also it displaces and disrupts communities. It affects our clients' abilities to stay where their kids go to school. So their kids end up missing school, end up having to go from school to school. Their ability to learn is affected. It also affects our clients' abilities to have stable employment, have stable transportation. Honestly, whether we think about it or not, housing really is a building block upon which a lot of who we are is founded. And when that's taken away, it can be a domino effect.
And so eviction has a wide and lasting multi-generational impact on families and on the communities in which they live. And it also turns out, whether or not you are actually ever removed from your home, the mere filing of an eviction against you can severely impact your ability to find housing elsewhere for years.
Even if the eviction filing doesn't ultimately end with an actual eviction, even if it's dismissed, the fact that it was filed becomes a matter of public record. And many apartment complexes do background checks. And the mere fact that a case was filed is often all they need to see to reject the application. So just having that case filed often it keeps tenants out of housing.
I wonder if some listeners might wonder about how hard avoiding eviction can really be. I know that driving around these days, I see a lot of signs up, like everywhere I go, it seems, promoting jobs like we're hiring, join our team. If that's the case, how much of a concern can widespread eviction really be?
It can be a huge concern. What I'm hearing from my tenants is that they are still having a hard time finding jobs and having a hard time finding jobs that make enough to pay the rent. Because again, the rents are being hiked. They've increased a lot. And the average take home of someone who's working minimum wage is no longer enough to afford the average rent. And so it's just simply not enough for them to actually be able to stay in their homes. Plus, when you're talking about a time where they've been out of work, you're also talking about a time where rent has been accruing along with late fees, other penalties. And so it can turn into a snowball effect where there's already so much debt that's being owed that even if they do have a job now, it's really hard to pay back the rent that was already previously owed.
What are some of the good landlords out there doing? I mean, are there best practices that you've witnessed?
There absolutely are. And I would say that the main hallmarks of landlords that we truly appreciate and support are those who are willing to enter into payment plans, to forgive some of the late fees, to really work with their tenants.
There's no denying these times are trying for landlords, too, especially the mom and pop variety, many of whom depend on rent money for their own personal income. But Erica Taylor says that it's actually in the best interest of landlords to work with their tenants. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau agrees, noting that evictions are expensive and time-consuming, while federal rental assistance could cover up to 18 months of rent. Besides, as a lot of people struggle right now, there's no guarantee that landlords will find replacement tenants who can pay rent. If the tenant they throw out is a historically good tenant, says Taylor, they may be being penny wise and pound foolish. Instead, she advocates for a scenario that involves embracing one another's humanity in order to head off the destabilization of our community. Meanwhile, Nikki Price is still trying to track down her complex's former manager to sign off on her rental assistance. She says she hesitates now to leave her apartment. She doesn't want to come home and find the locks changed, like happened with her neighbor.
Your home is supposed to be a place of comfort. You know, it's a place that you come into and you close the door and leave every ounce of chaos outside. And when you're stuck in limbo, I mean, honestly, I had started packing up my stuff because I thought that they were gonna, get ready to put me out after that eviction notice, and it's like, here I am, I'm sitting in my apartment and half of it is boxed up. Pictures are taken off the wall. This is not home. This is not comfort for me.
Many thanks to Nikki Price for talking with us for this episode. Thanks to AVLF's Erica Taylor. If you're finding yourself at risk for eviction, we have some helpful links in today's show notes. There, we also have an Atlanta Region Eviction Tracker created by ARC in partnership with Georgia Tech and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. You can find all of that on the webpage for this episode. That's at whatsnextatl.org/podcast. That's it for today. Take care.